My name is Amina Al-Saud. I am 28 years old, and I was born into a life most people only imagine from the outside. When people hear the word princess, they picture gold halls, silk gowns, servants waiting quietly by the walls, and a life protected from every problem. And yes, much of that was true. I grew up inside a royal compound surrounded by marble floors, high gates, and guards who never smiled. But what people never see is the silence that fills those walls. And the silence of expectations, the silence of fear, the silence of questions that are never allowed to be asked. From the moment I could understand words, I was taught that Islam was not just our religion. It was our identity, our duty, and our honor. My father often said, "Our family protects the faith of this nation. Remember that, Amina." I remember sitting cross-legged on a carpet as a child, while a tutor recited verses from the Quran slowly and sternly. I repeated every word carefully because mistakes were not tolerated. My childhood was filled with memorization, discipline, and constant reminders that obedience to Allah was the greatest purpose of life. I learned early that questioning was dangerous, not just disrespectful, dangerous. But even when I was young, there were moments when something inside me felt unsettled. I remember one evening when I was perhaps 8 years old, and the call to prayer echoed across the palace courtyard, while the sky turned orange above the desert. Everyone moved quickly to prepare for prayer, but I lingered near the window watching the horizon. I remember thinking quietly, almost whispering inside my own mind, "Why does God feel so far away if we pray so much?" I never told anyone that thought. Children in my world were expected to believe, not wonder. As I grew older, the expectations grew heavier. My brothers were trained in leadership and religious authority. I was trained in dignity, obedience, and representation. Every word I spoke in public had to reflect honor on our family and our faith. I attended religious lectures where powerful scholars spoke about defending Islam against outsiders. They described Christianity as a corrupted religion and warned that those who followed Jesus were deceived. I listened carefully because that was what a good daughter did. But something inside me always felt empty after those lessons. It was like drinking water that never satisfied thirst. At night, when the palace finally became quiet, I would sit alone in my room and stare at the ceiling, wondering why faith felt more like pressure than peace. I remember once asking my mother softly, "Do you ever feel afraid that we might misunderstand God?" She looked at me with shock and quickly said, "Amina, never say such things. Doubt is a whisper from Shaitan." After that, I kept my questions buried deep inside my heart. Years passed like this. Outwardly, I was the perfect daughter of a royal Muslim family. Inside, however, there was a quiet emptiness I could never explain. It felt like my soul was searching for something I did not yet have the courage to name. If you are listening to my story right now, maybe you understand what it feels like to carry questions you cannot speak aloud. And before I continue telling you what happened next, I want to ask you something from my heart. If stories like mine matter to you, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might also be searching for truth. I say this not for popularity, but because there are many people living in silence the way I once did. Maybe my story will reach one of them. Because what happened later in my life would shatter everything I thought I knew about faith, about God, and about the path I was expected to follow. And it began with a single moment when the cracks in my certainty finally started to appear. The world I grew up in was carefully controlled. Inside the royal compound, every movement, every conversation, every lesson had purpose. Faith was not simply practiced there, it was enforced like law. By the time I was a teenager, I had memorized large portions of the Quran, attended endless lectures from respected imams, and learned exactly how to defend Islam whenever someone questioned it. My teachers often praised me. "Princess Amina is disciplined," one of them once told my father. "She understands the responsibility of her position." I smiled politely when I heard those words, but inside I felt strangely hollow, because the more I learned, the more something began to trouble me. At first it was small things, verses that seemed harsh, stories that left me unsettled rather than peaceful. Whenever I asked questions, my tutors would quickly respond with the same tone of authority. "You must not doubt the wisdom of Allah." The conversation always ended there. In our world, obedience was considered a form of faith. Still, something deep inside my mind refused to stay quiet. I remember one afternoon sitting in a private study hall with 2 other young women from influential families. The imam teaching us spoke passionately about protecting Islam from corruption. He warned us about Christians and Jews, saying they had distorted God's message. As he spoke, his voice grew louder, filled with urgency. Truth must be defended, he declared. Everyone nodded in agreement, including me. But inside I felt uneasy. If truth was truly strong, why did it seem so afraid of questions? That thought stayed with me long after the lecture ended. But the moment that truly changed something inside my heart happened months later. It was late evening in the palace. The halls were quiet, and the smell of incense drifted softly through the corridors. I was walking toward the library when I heard angry voices coming from one of the servant quarters. Curious, I slowed my steps and stood just outside the doorway. Inside the room, one of the senior security officers was shouting at a young servant named Karim. Karim was a quiet man who had worked in the palace for years. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but that night he looked terrified. The officer held something small in his hand. "Where did you get this?" he demanded harshly. Karim's voice trembled. "Please, I meant no harm." The officer lifted the object so everyone in the room could see it. It was a small, worn book. And even from the doorway I could recognize the cross on its cover. A Bible. The officer's face hardened with anger. "Do you know what this is?" he barked. Karim lowered his head. "It gives me hope," he whispered. The words hung in the air like something forbidden. One of the guards slapped the book from Karim's hands. Another pushed him roughly against the wall. I stood frozen outside the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer shouted again. "Hope comes from Allah alone. This corruption will not enter this house." Karim's voice broke as he spoke. "But when I read about Jesus, I feel peace." Before he could finish, the officer struck him hard across the face. I turned away quickly, my chest tight with shock. That night I could not sleep. I lay awake staring into the darkness of my room while the events replayed in my mind again and again. The fear in Karim's eyes, the desperation in his voice when he said the word peace. I had heard the name Jesus many times before in Islamic teaching. We were told he was only a prophet, nothing more. Yet the way Karim spoke about him sounded different. It sounded personal, alive. I sat up in my bed sometime after midnight, my heart restless. A single thought entered my mind slowly, like a whisper I had tried to ignore for years. What if the truth is not what I was taught? The question terrified me. In my world, even thinking such words could destroy everything. My family, and my identity, my future. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to push the thought away. But something had already changed. For the first time in my life, a small crack had appeared in the certainty I had always been forced to carry. And once a crack appears, it becomes impossible to pretend the surface is still whole. I did not know it yet, but that moment outside the servant quarters would become the first step on a path that would lead me somewhere I never expected to go. After the night I witnessed Karim being punished, something inside me refused to return to the way it was before. I tried to focus on my usual routines, religious study, family appearances, charity events, but the memory of his voice stayed with me. The way he had whispered the name of Jesus with hope instead of fear disturbed me more than I could explain. In our world, Jesus was mentioned, but only as a prophet, never as someone who could bring peace to the heart. Yet Karim spoke as if he had encountered something real. Something alive. Days passed, but curiosity slowly began to grow inside me like a quiet flame. I told myself it was only intellectual interest. I wanted to understand what Karim had seen in that book. Nothing more. At least that is what I told myself at the time. The opportunity came unexpectedly during a formal dinner hosted at the palace. Diplomats from several Western countries had been invited. And as part of my duties, I was expected to greet them politely and represent the royal family with dignity. One of the guests was a middle-aged diplomat from Europe. His Arabic was slow but respectful, and during our conversation he spoke about many things: culture, education, and faith. When he mentioned Christianity, I felt a sudden tension inside my chest. I tried to remain composed, but curiosity pushed me to ask a careful question. "Why do Christians speak about Jesus as if they know him personally?" I asked. The man paused for a moment, studying my expression gently. Then he smiled. "Because we believe he is alive," he said softly. I had no response. The conversation moved on quickly, but his words stayed with me long after the dinner ended. "Because we believe he is alive." That sentence echoed in my mind again and again. Weeks later, while alone in my room late at night, I finally did something I never imagined I would do. I opened my phone and searched for the Bible. My hands trembled as I downloaded a Bible app. Even though I was alone, it felt as if someone might suddenly burst through the door and discover what I was doing. When the download finished, I stared at the icon on my screen for several seconds before opening it. The first passage I read was from the Gospel of Matthew. The words felt strangely different from anything I had read before. And instead of commands and warnings, I found stories of compassion, healing, mercy. I remember reading the words slowly, almost whispering them under my breath. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I sat there frozen, staring at the screen. Rest. That word alone felt unfamiliar in the kind of faith I had always known. For the first time while reading about God, I did not feel fear. I felt something gentle, something peaceful. But peace quickly turned into panic. What was I doing? If anyone discovered this Bible on my phone, the consequences would be severe. I quickly closed the app and hid my phone beneath my pillow as if it were something dangerous. For several days I avoided opening it again. But the curiosity would not leave me. Late one night, when the palace was silent, I opened the app once more and continued reading. I read about Jesus forgiving people others had condemned. I read about him touching the sick and speaking kindly to the broken. Every page stirred something deep inside my heart. It was as if I was discovering a voice I had been searching for without knowing it. But the danger of what I was doing became painfully clear one evening when my brother unexpectedly entered my room without knocking. I quickly locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. He looked at me suspiciously. "What were you doing?" he asked. My heart pounded loudly in my chest. "Nothing," I said, trying to sound calm. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced at my phone. For a moment I thought he might reach for it. Instead, he simply nodded slowly. "Be careful what you fill your mind with, Amina," he said. "There are many lies in the world." After he left the room, my legs felt weak. I realized then that my curiosity was no longer harmless. If discovered, it could destroy everything I had ever known. Yet despite the fear, I could not stop reading, because every time I opened those pages, I felt something my heart had never known before. Peace that did not come from obedience or pressure, but from love. And I began to realize something terrifying. Curiosity was no longer the only thing growing inside me. Faith was beginning to grow as well. For weeks my life became a quiet battle that no one around me could see. During the day, I continued playing the role everyone expected. I attended family gatherings, listened to religious lectures, and smiled politely when scholars spoke about defending Islam. But at night, when the palace finally became silent and the long corridors emptied, I returned to my room and opened the Bible on my phone. Those hours became the only time I felt truly awake. I read slowly, afraid of missing even a single word. The stories of Jesus began to settle deep into my heart in a way I could not explain. The way he spoke to the poor, the way he forgave sinners, and the way he treated people others rejected. It felt completely different from the God I had always feared. One night I read a passage where Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." I remember whispering the words aloud in my dark room. Peacemakers, not warriors, not defenders of honor. Peacemakers. Something about that word touched a place in my soul that had always felt wounded. But the more I read, the more conflict grew inside me. My mind was filled with questions I had never dared to ask before. If these words were true, then everything I had been taught about Jesus might be incomplete. If Jesus truly offered forgiveness and peace, why had I never heard anyone speak about him this way before? I tried to silence those thoughts during the day, but at night they returned stronger than ever. Eventually, the tension inside me became so overwhelming that I stopped reading for several days. I told myself it was safer not to continue. I prayed the Islamic prayers more carefully than ever, hoping the unease inside my heart would disappear. But instead of peace, I only felt emptiness. It was like my soul had already tasted something real and could not return to what it had known before. Then one night something happened that changed everything. I had fallen asleep after a long day of family obligations. The desert wind was blowing softly outside my window, and the room was quiet except for the distant hum of palace security vehicles. Suddenly, I found myself standing in a place that did not feel like the palace at all. It was a desert, but darker and more violent than any desert I had ever seen. The sky above me was filled with thick clouds, and the wind howled loudly around me. Sand whipped against my face as if a storm were rising from the earth itself. I felt completely alone, and the wind pushed me backward as I struggled to see through the darkness. Fear gripped my chest. I remember shouting into the storm, but my voice seemed to disappear into the wind. Then, through the chaos, I saw something in the distance. At first it was only a faint light, but slowly the light grew brighter, moving closer through the storm as if the wind had no power over it. As the figure approached, the storm around me seemed to weaken. The sand began to settle. The darkness faded slightly. And then I saw him clearly. A man standing calmly in the middle of the storm. His presence was unlike anything I had ever felt. There was authority in the way he stood, but also peace. A peace so strong that it seemed to push the storm away from him. I could not see every detail of his face, but the light surrounding him made my heart tremble. He looked directly at me. I felt completely exposed, as if he could see every secret, every fear, every hidden question inside my soul. Yet instead of feeling condemned, I felt understood. Then he spoke. His voice was calm but powerful, cutting through the wind like a command. "Do not be afraid." The moment he said those words, the storm began to fade. The wind slowed. The darkness lifted slightly. He took a step closer and continued speaking. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Something inside my chest exploded with emotion. I wanted to ask who he was, but somehow I already knew. Before I could speak, the dream ended. I woke up suddenly in my bed, breathing heavily. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. The room was dark and silent, exactly as it had been before I fell asleep. For several minutes I simply sat there trying to calm my breathing. The dream felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and opened the Bible app again. I searched the words I had heard in the dream, and there they were in the Gospel of John. I am the way, the truth, and the life. My entire body went cold as I stared at the screen. I had never read that verse before, yet those were the exact words the man in my dream had spoken to me. In that moment, a terrifying question filled my mind. Had Jesus just spoken to me? If that was true, then everything I believed about God, about faith, about truth, might have been wrong all along. After that night, something inside me began to change in ways I could no longer hide. I stopped attending some of the religious lectures I had once loved. I smiled politely when the imam spoke, but my mind drifted elsewhere, thinking about the man in the dream and the words I had read in the Bible. The more I tried to suppress it, the more it grew. My family began to notice the shift. My mother commented once during breakfast, "Amina, you seem distant these days. Is something troubling you?" I forced a smile and said, "Nothing, mother. I am well." But the truth was far different. My heart was pulling me towards something I could not yet name aloud. Suspicion began to spread quietly through the palace. Servants whispered about me when they thought no one was listening. My cousins watched my every gesture. Eventually, my private world was breached in a way I never imagined. One evening, my cousin, a young woman trained to monitor me subtly, discovered my phone left charging on a side table. She glanced at it and saw the Bible app icon. Her expression changed immediately from curiosity to shock. Within minutes, the palace halls were filled with whispers and hurried footsteps. My father's voice rang through the corridors, sharp and commanding, summoning me to the main hall. I remember walking through the marble floors, each step heavy with dread, wondering if my life had just crossed a line from which there was no return. My father's eyes were fierce when I entered the room. The religious leaders and senior palace advisors had been gathered. The tension in the air was suffocating. One of the imams stepped forward, holding my phone as if it were evidence of a crime. "Princess Amina has been discovered engaging with corrupted teachings," he said sternly. "This is a betrayal to the faith, to the family, and to Allah." My heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. I tried to explain, my voice shaking. I only wanted to understand. I have questions." But the words sounded weak, powerless. My father's face hardened. "Questions are dangerous when they lead you away from the truth," he said. I felt the weight of the room press against me. I was accused of dishonoring the family, of risking shame and scandal. Threats were whispered in the pauses of conversation, hints that leaving Islam could mean death, exile, or total rejection. Fear surged through me, a tidal wave threatening to consume everything inside. Yet even as the walls closed in, a strange calm lingered in my chest. The memory of the dream and the words of Jesus pulsed inside me like a heartbeat I could not ignore. The peace I had felt then refused to leave me, even in the face of terror. That night, after the confrontation, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling. I could hear footsteps outside, servants moving carefully, whispers traveling along the palace corridors. I thought about Karim, about the man in the dream, about the words I had read in secret. The question that had haunted me now became louder than my fear. Could it be that the path I had been taught to follow was not the only truth? Could Jesus really be alive, really offer the peace my soul had been seeking for years? I felt trapped, but strangely alive in that trap. I knew that the world I had known would never be the same again. And the discovery of the Bible app had set something irreversible in motion. My family and their protectors demanded obedience, conformity, and silence. But inside me, a quiet flame had ignited. And though I could not yet speak it aloud, I knew that the path ahead, whatever it held, would lead me closer to the truth I had glimpsed. The night stretched long and heavy, but my heart whispered a single word I dared not say aloud. Hope. It was the first time in my life I had felt it without fear. Without shame, without expectation. Just hope. And from that hope, a choice began to form, though I could not yet see how dangerous or liberating it would become. After that night, the palace walls felt smaller, tighter, and heavier than ever. My movements were carefully monitored. My phone, once my secret window to a new world, was taken from me, examined, and locked away. My family tightened every aspect of my life. Friends I once trusted became distant, speaking cautiously, and as if one wrong word could destroy me. Religious leaders were brought into the palace to confront me, to argue with me for hours on end. I sat silently in a marble hall as scholars lectured me, their voices booming and judgmental. "Christianity is false," one of them said. "It is a deception. Return to the truth or face the consequences." Their words felt like chains around my chest, pressing down with suffocating weight. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend the stirrings of faith growing in my heart, but fear kept my lips sealed. And yet, every moment of pressure only strengthened what they could not see, my growing certainty that the God I had glimpsed in the dream and in the Bible was real. One night, after the lectures had ended and the palace had fallen into quiet, I discovered a hidden laptop tucked away in a corner of my room, a relic my father had never used. I powered it on carefully, praying that no one would find me. For the first time in days, I could breathe. I searched online secretly for Christian communities, sermons, and teachings. Eventually, I found an online church, a place where people met virtually, read the Bible together, prayed together, and shared testimonies of faith. I hesitated, afraid of what might happen if anyone discovered me, but the longing in my heart was stronger than fear. I clicked to join a meeting. The moment I saw the faces of believers speaking freely about Jesus, and my chest tightened with emotion. Their words felt alive, full of courage, honesty, and peace. I realized in that instant that what I had been searching for all my life was not permission or approval. It was connection, truth, and love. Over the next several weeks, I attended these online meetings secretly every night. I listened to stories of faith, forgiveness, and redemption. I learned how to pray in a way I had never known. The more I immersed myself, the more I felt my heart shifting. And the fear that had once ruled me was replaced by a quiet courage, a sense that even if my world demanded obedience, something greater had chosen me. But the danger was always present. Every knock at the door, every raised eyebrow, reminded me that one misstep could cost my freedom or even my life. I prayed silently, "Jesus, give me strength, protect me." And slowly, as the days passed, the prayer became a lifeline. My heart began to choose Christ openly. And even if my lips could not yet confess him to the world around me, I would wake in the middle of the night with a sense of calm I had never known in my entire life. Peace that could not be explained, not by tutors, not by imams, not by the rules I had been forced to live under. I realized something that terrified and thrilled me at the same time. Faith built on fear was nothing. True faith was choice, love, not coercion. And as I felt that truth settle in my chest, I knew that leaving the world I had known would be inevitable. But at that moment, even with danger pressing on every side, even with my family watching and my life constrained, I understood something I had never dared to hope before. I was free in my heart. I was beginning to belong to something greater than palace walls, scrutiny, or even bloodlines. I was beginning to belong to Jesus. The day the attack came began like any other, yet it was nothing I could have prepared for. I was traveling with a small convoy under heavy security, moving between royal residences for an official visit. The desert sun beat down, and the hum of engines and armored vehicles filled the air. I tried to focus on the passing dunes, trying to calm the tension that had become a constant companion in my life. My heart was still secretly devoted to the Jesus I had discovered in my dream and in the Bible, though no one around me knew. And then, without warning, chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the calm, bullets tore through the metal around us, and screams filled the air. Guards shouted orders, engines roared, and dust and smoke mixed into a haze that made it nearly impossible to see. My body reacted instinctively. I ducked and pressed myself against the floor of the armored vehicle, my hands covering my face. I remember hearing the sharp sound of bullets hitting metal, the cries of soldiers, the desperate shouting of my own family members. And then I felt it. Pain. To sharp, burning pain ripping through my body as bullets struck me multiple times. Later, doctors would say 32 shots had torn through our vehicle and my body. In that moment, lying on the floor, I believed my life was over. I could feel darkness closing in, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on me. And yet, even in that terror, one thought rose above all else. Jesus. I whispered his name, trembling. Jesus, save me. The words were barely audible over the gunfire and screaming. But I repeated them over and over, clinging to them like a lifeline. Pain, fear, and death pressed in from every side, but somehow a sense of surrender filled my heart. I had no idea if he would answer, but I knew I had nowhere else to turn. The vehicle lurched violently as bullets tore through the metal again. I felt my body weaken, my consciousness slipping, my vision fading to black around the edges. I thought of my life in the palace, the lectures, the expectations, the fear, and the hidden moments I had spent reading the Bible. I thought of Kareem and the young servant who had first sparked questions in my heart. I thought of the dream, of the man of light who had spoken to me, and I clung to that memory with desperate strength. And then, as the world seemed to collapse around me, something extraordinary happened. The pain and chaos did not vanish, but a calm washed over me, deeper than anything I had ever known. A warmth I could not explain filled my chest. And I felt as though invisible hands were holding me upright, shielding me from the worst of the destruction. I could no longer hear the bullets as sharply, the screams softened into murmurs, and a strange, overwhelming sense of peace filled the space around me. My heart whispered, "Do not fear, I am with you." I had never spoken those words aloud, but somehow they came from somewhere beyond me, wrapping around me like a cloak. I wanted to open my eyes and see who had spoken. But my body refused to obey. I was slipping further, yet I felt alive, preserved, protected in a way that defied explanation. When I finally awoke, it was not in the desert, not in the vehicle, but in a hospital room bathed in pale light. Machines beeped steadily, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. I could feel tubes, bandages, and the weight of survival pressing against me. The doctors later told me that my survival was impossible, that others in the convoy had died. That the bullets had destroyed so much of the vehicle I should never have lived. And yet, here I was. Somehow I had survived 32 bullets, chaos, and terror. In that moment, lying weak but alive, I knew with certainty that this was not luck. This was not coincidence. Something greater had intervened, and for the first time, fully aware of it, I understood that Jesus had saved me. When I first opened my eyes in the hospital, everything felt surreal. And the bright white light of the room stung my vision, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nose. Machines beeped softly around me, and nurses moved quietly, whispering to one another. My body ached in ways I had never known. Every movement sent waves of pain through me. Yet, despite the injury, despite the chaos of the attack, there was an unexplainable calm inside me. It was as though my heart knew something my mind could barely grasp. And the doctors later told me that what had happened was impossible, that the bullets had passed through the vehicle, through bodies, and through me, and yet I survived. They said that the patterns of damage and survival could not be explained. But I knew. Deep down, I knew it was not just luck, it was grace. The night of the attack had felt like an eternity. The bullets, the screams, the shaking vehicle, they were all vivid in my memory. But in the midst of that terror, I had felt invisible hands holding me, surrounding me, shielding me from what should have killed me. It was not fear that I had felt at that moment. It was peace. A peace that I had never known in my life. Not in the palace, not in prayers, not in the endless memorization of verses. And now, in this hospital room, as I lay covered in bandages and tubes, that peace remained. It was stronger than the fear of death, stronger than the shame and anger of my family. Stronger than the pain that racked my body. I could feel it settling in my chest, radiating through my arms and legs, filling every corner of my mind. I knew, without a doubt, that I had been saved by Jesus. It was not just survival, it was intervention. I had walked through death and come into life, not because of skill, not because of protection by guards or armor, but because of Him. While I drifted between sleep and consciousness, I began to see images that felt like visions. Figures of light, luminous and gentle, surrounded me. I could not make out faces or forms clearly, but the presence was undeniable. They seemed to move with purpose, guarding me, holding me, lifting me above the terror. I could feel them whispering comfort without words, like a language of the soul. In the days that followed, I learned that many around me had not survived. Others in the convoy were gone, lives taken instantly by the bullets meant for death. And yet, in my case, and every wound had been tempered, every life-threatening injury had been somehow mitigated. I remembered the moment in the vehicle when I had whispered Jesus' name for the first time in desperation, and I realized that it was not coincidence. It was a turning point. It was faith calling out and being answered. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. I was alive. I was here. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had been chosen, spared, and preserved for a purpose beyond what I could see. I began to pray in that hospital bed for the first time with full awareness, not as ritual or obligation, but as a soul speaking to a God I had glimpsed in secret, a God who had met me in my fear and held me when death came. I whispered, "Jesus, thank you. I do not understand, but I trust you." And even in that fragile state, with every bone and muscle in pain, my heart felt whole. The hospital staff marveled at my survival. My family, when they arrived, were stunned. Some whispered about miracle, others about impossible luck. I knew differently. I had been lifted beyond human explanation. That moment became the first true awareness of my new life, my rebirth, and the journey I was beginning. Surviving the attack did not make the world safer, and it did not make my family accept what I was discovering. But for the first time, I felt the certainty of being held by something eternal, something unshakable, something alive, Jesus Christ. In that calm, I finally understood that life could be dangerous, terrifying, even deadly, and yet there could be peace that no one could take away. I could not see the future, but I had been marked by His presence, carried through death by angels, and set on a path I could not turn away from. That was the moment I knew the story of my life had changed forever, and nothing, not fear, not threats, not even death itself, could ever erase what had happened that day. After my recovery, the reality of the world outside the hospital walls hit me like a tidal wave. My family, though relieved I had survived, now made it clear that my choices had consequences. My father summoned me privately, his face stern, his words heavy with authority and expectation. "Amina," he said quietly, "you have two options. You renounce this foreign faith, or you leave everything behind. Your status, your inheritance, your protection. Even your family, gone." I felt the weight of the room pressing down on me, the walls of the palace suddenly closing in. Every breath I took was heavy with expectation. I could feel the eyes of my family, the imams and advisors pressing into me, waiting for a response that would define my future. Threats of exile, shame, and dishonor were not idle words. In our culture, leaving Islam was considered the gravest betrayal. Some whispered of punishments so severe they were almost unimaginable. But for the first time in my life, fear did not rule me. I remembered the nights I had spent reading the Bible in secret, the moments of peace in my dream, the invisible protection I had felt during the attack. The calm in my heart was stronger than any threat, any pressure, any fear of losing the world I had known. I took a deep breath, my pulse quickening, my lips trembling slightly. "Father," I said, my voice shaking but clear, "I cannot deny what I have found. I choose Jesus Christ. I choose Him over everything else." Silence filled the room. The only sound was the soft whisper of the air conditioning and my own heartbeat. My father's face turned pale, and the imams exchanged quick, uneasy glances. For a moment, I thought the silence itself would crush me. Then he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You are choosing death, socially, spiritually, and morally. You will have nothing from us. You are on your own." I nodded, the weight of the words settling in. I was leaving behind everything I had ever known, my home, my comfort, my family's protection, and my position in a world of privilege. Yet, in that same moment, I felt lighter than I had ever been. Freedom does not always come softly. Sometimes it comes with a price that shakes the ground beneath you. I knew I was stepping onto that ground now. Over the following days, rejection became tangible. Friends I had trusted turned away. Advisors who had once smiled now avoided eye contact. Even the servants who had quietly loved and protected me moved cautiously, unsure if showing kindness to me could bring them danger. And yet, despite the isolation, I felt a strange joy rising in my heart. The peace I had glimpsed in my dream, the protection I had felt during the attack, the love I had discovered in secret study, none of it had abandoned me. I realized then that truth was more valuable than safety. That the life I had been given could not compare to the life I had found in Christ. Every threat, every warning, every whisper of danger became background noise to the certainty of His presence. I spent hours in prayer, sometimes alone in the garden behind the hospital, sometimes on a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights, simply speaking to Jesus, thanking him, asking for courage and confessing my fear. And every time I felt his peace return, steady and unshakable. And the choice to follow him had cost me everything in the world I had known, yet it had given me everything my soul had ever wanted: love, peace, hope, and the courage to live as I was created to live. I understood finally that freedom is not the absence of danger or loss. True freedom comes when you stand in the light of truth, knowing that nothing, even exile, shame, or death, can touch the life God has given you. That day, in the presence of my father, my family, and the religious leaders, and I chose Jesus Christ, and I would never look back. Leaving Saudi Arabia was not easy. I walked away from everything I had ever known: the palace, the title, the wealth, the protection, the people who had raised me. Every step felt heavy, but also strangely light, as if the chains of fear I had carried all my life were finally breaking. I moved to a place where no one knew my name, where I could simply be a woman seeking God without judgment or expectation. I found a Christian community that welcomed me without question, without whispers, without fear. They became my new family, guiding me through prayer, teaching me the scriptures, and showing me what it meant to follow Jesus freely. For the first time, I experienced faith not as obligation, but as relationship. Every morning I woke with a sense of purpose and peace I had never known in the palace. I could read the Bible aloud, pray openly, worship without fear, and share my heart without hiding behind a mask of obedience. I realized that the bullets meant to silence me had instead become the moment God rescued me. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at faith, at freedom, at love. Looking back, I understand now that leaving my kingdom and my past behind was not losing everything. It was gaining everything I had been searching for. I am free in Jesus. I am loved. I am known. And my story has one purpose: to tell the world that Jesus Christ still saves, still heals, and still sets captives free. Whatever fear or oppression you face, whatever chains hold you, I want you to know this: there is hope, there is freedom, there is life in him. If you are listening to my testimony, hear me clearly. Jesus is real, he is alive, and he sees you, even when the world does not. My name is Princess Amina, and I am his, forever.